So let me first start with introductions. Having said that, I don't think the panelists need one, but still, let me just start with that. So today we have Anjali Bansal. Anjali Bansal is the founder of Avaana Capital, investing in technology and innovation-led startups who are catalyzing climate action and sustainability and delivering exponential returns. Previously, Anjali has been the chairperson of Dana Bank and global partner and managing director with TPG Growth PE. She started her career as a strategy consultant with McKinsey & Company in New York. Anjali has invested in and mentored various successful startups, including Delivery, Urban Company, Nykaa, and Lenskart. She's closely associated with Niti Aayog's Women Entrepreneurship Platform and Digital Solution, and is on the Expert Advisory Committee for the Startup India Seed Fund Scheme. Anjali is a member of the steering committee advising the government on ONDC, Open Network for Digital Commerce. She also serves as an independent non-executive director on several leading boards, including Tata Power, Piramal Enterprises. She has been appointed as President, Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and serves on the CII National Committee on Corporate Governance. She has been listed as one of the most powerful women in Indian business by India's leading publications, Business Today and Fortune India. A very, very warm welcome, Anjali.
Thank you, Ahana. Delighted to be here. And thank you very much for the kind words.
Okay, so next we have Adwaita Nayar. Adwaita is an executive director of Nykaa since July 1st, 2021. She also serves as the chairperson and chief executive officer of Nykaa Fashion. She co-founded the company and has been involved in the areas of marketing, operations, and product development. She holds a bachelor's degree in applied mathematics from the Yale University and a master's degree in business administration with distinction from the Harvard Business School. Post her academic pursuits, she rejoined FSN Brands in the year 2017 as Chief Executive Officer in Brands to create and strengthen the offline retail footprint of Nykaa. Since 2018, she has established the Nykaa Fashion business and currently oversees NykaaFashion.com as well as many of the company's owned and partner brands. So Adwaita, thank you so much for joining in today.
Thank you for having me, Ahana.
Moving on, we have Renuka Ramnath. So Renuka is one of the most experienced private equity fund managers in India. She has been in the financial services market for the last 35 years. She has relentlessly pioneered bringing domestic capital to the alternate asset industry in the past 2 decades. In 2001, she became MD and CEO of the ICICI Venture. She led the firm to become one of the largest private equity funds in India, scaling from $50 million to $2.5 billion under management. Renuka turned entrepreneur in 2009 and found Multiples, a dedicated India-focused private equity fund with an AUM of $2 billion. Multiples has backed 25 enterprises and built them to scale. Renuka is the current chairperson of IVCA, Indian Private Equity and Venture Capital Association, and is an avid champion for the industry to open up alternate assets to both domestic and international investors. She's also a board member of GPCA, the Global Industry Association for Private Capital. Renuka has been featured in many prestigious listings, including the top 25 most powerful women in business, India's most powerful CEOs, the top 25 bank women in finance, and many, many more. Thank you so much, Renuka, for joining in.
Thank you. Thank you. Real pleasure to be here.
And last but not the least, Shweta Bhatia. Shweta joined 8 Rose Ventures in April 2018 and leads the technology investment team in India. She has over 15 years of experience in growth investing and finance. Most recently as head of Asia Investments for the Venture Capital and Growth Equity team at Goldman Sachs Private Investment Partners. Shweta began her career in the investment banking division of Goldman Sachs based in New York and worked in a growth equity investing role at Warburg Pincus in Mumbai before rejoining Goldman Sachs in 2010. Her key focus sectors include consumer tech, enterprise SaaS, and fintech, including experience with investments such as Whatfix, ShyPoint, ShareOfax, and MoEngage. Shweta received an MBA from Harvard Business School and a BA in Computer Science and Economics from Smith College. Shweta, a very, very warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Really happy to be here.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. So let's deep dive into the conversation. So I have to start with you, Shweta. I really found your quote very, very interesting. You said the toughest ceiling to break through is often within. So my question to you is it fair to say that external glass ceilings exist? Would you agree, disagree, and why?
Yeah, look, I absolutely believe that glass ceilings do exist for women, especially in careers which are really dominated by men in leadership positions. So there's no denying these ceilings exist, and women often have to struggle with, joining these careers, not having enough male role models. So really having to really walk the tightrope between being assertive, but not being seen as being too aggressive, being kind, but not being seen as being too mild and unable to be a leader, etc. So I definitely think that kind of conditioning exists in our society, and women have to work through it in a way that men just don't have to worry about it at all in the workplace. But I do believe, just based on my journey, that we've made a ton of progress in the last couple of decades. And I do feel that at some point, and I've seen this, right, it really falls down upon the women. And of course, it is upon us women to support other women and other, men to support women to do this too. But a lot of it is really, it is in the mind. It is us sort of believing this is possible, us not selling ourselves short, not feeling like it's almost impossible in these very, demanding careers. I will not be able to do both. I won't be able to have a career. I won't be able to, and then I have to give up on being happy with my partner, my family, contributing to the community, etc. So I think that is the big bias that society gives us, and it's a lot of nurture. And if we're able to really break through that, then there's no stopping us, right? And we can strike this tightrope, and we can really make things happen.
No, absolutely. Anjali, what would you say to this?
So look, 50% of the world's population, give or take a couple percentage points, is female. Do we see a similar representation in the workplace? We don't. So clearly barriers exist, whether there are, I would say it's not just glass ceilings, but glass walls as well. And we have giant gated communities, which one by one are getting opened up. Gated communities have gates. You have to find keys to those gates. For most of my generation, our sponsors, champions, sponsors, mentors were all men. Often the gatekeepers and key providers are the men. So the solutioning to this, and Ahana, you and I have been talking about, yes, let's define the problem, but let's quickly move to solutioning. The solutions to these issues have to be inclusive. If we aim for a more inclusive world, then where are the men in this conversation? Very few things will be solved by a bunch of women talking to another bunch of women, saying life is tough. Life is tough. It is. Men in, let's get them involved in the solutioning. Let them own it as well. So now moving forward, glass ceilings, glass walls. What is the barrier? The barrier, 100%, right? Definitely there are biases. There are biases in society. There are biases in the workplace. And if you think about sort of the four actors in this play, you have the nation state that creates the laws and the legal framework and so on. You have organizations and companies, institutions, enterprises, funds, startups, whatever, right? They create the context, local context for the woman to work and be successful. There is the family from which she comes, the family and society, and then is she herself. So the state, for the most part, most good states have done a fair amount. Laws exist for wage parity, laws exist. Sometimes well-intentioned, they have unintended negative consequences for maternity leave and so on. But for the most part, the states are well-intentioned. Organizations, these days, good organizations are actually going out of their way, at least statedly going out of their way to attract, retain, grow their women. Something is still not working. And what is not working is our social context, our familial context. and ultimately somewhere inside herself. So she is a big actor in this play, getting past the imposter syndrome, getting past the self-doubt, and also in some ways, demanding more from your family and from your partners. So just as we do everything to create our workplace teams that enable and support our success, we will have to create home place teams. And we will not get to equitable workplaces till we have equitable home places, with all the baggage that goes with gender typed roles and who's responsible for what. So I'm going to pause there. I'm sure we'll continue this discussion.
That's very well said, Anjali. Renuka, would love to bring you in as well. Do you think these ceilings are more internal, or there are these glass walls also, as Anjali mentioned, externally?
No, I would concur with everything that has been said by both Shweta and Anjali. In certain workplaces, there are, I would say, more impenetrable glass walls and glass ceilings. In certain others, may not be so. So, for instance, I would like to believe, sitting outside, that in medical profession, right, for doctors, probably it is less intensive than, let us say, in financial services business or engineering business or something like that. So they do exist. And, let us remember that we are all coming from a society where we've gotten used to a certain mental conditioning and biases in our minds, and also in the mind of the spouses and their families and all of that for centuries. Now we are saying that the sheer hunt for talent, the sheer need to deliver on the macro opportunities, needs more human resources. We need to draw more people into the pool so that we can get to our destination faster. So I would think that we are sitting at a very pretty time in the economic cycle where organizations, if we, for a moment restrict ourselves to the corporate jobs, would need the women power to make sure that they have a wider pool to recruit from and get to their aspirations. So while the ceilings are there, we have a very good tailwind at this point of time. And if we bring this level of consciousness and also work on ourselves, as Shweta said, we would get there sooner.
Absolutely. So Adwaita, you are a recent graduate compared to the other panelists. Do you agree, or do you have a completely different point of view where you would say that I don't see any ceilings? What's your take here?
So I think a couple things. I think I'm cognizant that I speak from a place of great privilege, right? In terms of education, the type of family I grew up in, where I was made to feel that I could do anything, right? With a working mother as a role model. I also am cognizant. I want to preface by saying that all our experiences are sort of limited to what we experience. So I absolutely feel very blessed that I never faced any kind of glass ceiling. Obviously with Nykaa, it's a women-led organization. I think within the org, we don't have glass ceilings. Women's voices are very much heard, and it's very much not a typical traditional kind of workplace and workforce. But what I will say, and this is, quite personal, I grew up, going to the best educational institutions in the US, and grew up in a house where I was treated completely the same as my twin brother. And I was always made to feel that I could do whatever I wanted, and there was never going to be anything that came into my way. But I have to say that as you actually get older, you do start to realize that there are fundamental things that, just make being a woman and having a career a bit more difficult. So for example, I got married about 3 years ago, and my husband is the most incredible person ever. In fact, what he loved about me, or he says he fell in love with me, was because I was very career focused and very ambitious. And he's an incredibly supportive guy, but the fundamental truth is I had to move to Delhi, right? Despite my whole headquarters being in Bombay. And it's taken 3 years of me discussing with him and telling him that, hey, that's not cool, right? Like, this is a partnership. Why is that assumed that I move? But, there's just so many generations of kind of ways of being that get embedded in even the most modern men that I think fundamentally, until our men change, our women will face some amount of headwind. And I was lucky that Nykaa is a big, it was fairly established by the point this decision came, and I could open an office in Delhi and I commute weekly and I can afford that and all of that. But there's a whole segment of people who don't have that luxury. If you are not running Nykaa and your husband makes you move to Delhi and your job is in Bombay, there goes your job. I think then you talk about, I'm thinking about starting a family. Like there is a biological clock. That is also a reality. It's not the right time career-wise, but it's also something you have to do. So I think all I can speak is from my personal experience that though I faced no glass ceiling in the office and I was so privileged in how I was raised, I think there are still fundamental social structures that are, a bit disadvantaged for women. And I think the real change from the way I see it begins when we change, our husbands and our partners actually. And our families. It's not just husbands, right? It's the whole legacy thought process about who's going to take care of the house, who's going to take care of the kids and so forth. And the real partnership has to come to really drive any meaningful change.
No, absolutely. And I think all of you have touched upon one thing, which is social conditioning. And I wanted to talk about subconscious biases which exist because of this social conditioning. And let me also share a personal story. I'm not very proud of it, but given that here we want to have honest conversations, I went to IIT Bombay. It was a class of 600 students and just 28 girls. And of course, my friend circle, it was all the guys, right? And whenever I used to behave a certain way, a lot of my guy friends would behave, why are you behaving like a girl? And just to fit in, I would say, no, I'm not behaving like a girl. Why are you saying that? I was embarrassed and ashamed to be a girl. And now when I think of it, I would have answered it so differently. And I didn't even realize because, and Adwaita, just to your point, I was also raised by a working mother. She was a single mother who raised me in a very small city in Rajasthan. Even then, I had these subconscious biases. So, would love to understand from you, do you think these subconscious biases that exist externally and sometimes internally in your mind as well, if you can share some examples? And the most important thing is, once you identify it, how can you overcome it? And Renuka, I would love to start with you, and especially, the quote that you mentioned. You said entrepreneurship is the ultimate expression of your conviction. If the calling within you is deep and strong, please trust that the world is waiting to make it happen for you. Do you think that because of sometimes these subconscious biases, it is a little more difficult for women to identify that calling?
Yeah, I guess, sorry to make a non-verified comment, but probably most women feel comfortable to drop their passion for their pursuit and justify for family reasons or other things, right? And which is why probably we see fewer women entrepreneurs. We see the percentage of women in middle management a lot lower than in entry level, and then progressively becomes much kind of narrower. So what is it that we need to do to handhold the women as they transition? When you are at entry level, you're just living for yourself. Probably you're not married, you want to make some money, you want to justify that you went to all these good colleges, got a degree exactly like a boy. And somewhere along the way, you say that it is probably the right thing to prioritize other things than give your life for your career. That's where I feel that we need to create some hand-holding mechanism. Because sometimes, let's say, one of the simple facts we forget when we are raising children is that children are going to grow. So a 3-year-old child who needs a lot of the mother's time, when it gets to 6 years, needs a lot less. And when it gets to 9 years, almost doesn't need the mother's time, right? So this simple fact is something that will not occur to you or give you the strength when you are, dealing with a 3-year-old child. So how do you really handhold a woman and double down her conviction in her weak moments is probably the need for improving the diversity quotient, and here we can work at very many levels. It can be at personal level, it can be at the organizational level, it can be at the institutional level, through forums like this, where you create that community who can, share some thoughts, give some help. Yeah, I famously like to give this example when I was in ICSA and I used to be terribly nervous about meeting all the very senior women. I was once in an elevator with Lalita Gupte. She was already the DMD or joint MD, and I was a very entry-level officer. And I almost wanted to jump out of the lift because I said, what conversation am I going to have with her, right? And she turned around and said, how are you? I said, I'm fine, ma'am. How's your baby? I said, oh, it's fine. I said, I'm sure you're going through, very tough time trying to raise the child. We have all done it. Don't worry. This will pass through. If you have any problems, come and talk to us, right? Something very, very simple like that, even 35 years fast forward, I still remember it as something that made a difference, where I said that, oh, top bosses here find it important to encourage women who are going through, this phase of maternity, raising a small child and so on. And therefore, this is a place I want to remain connected, and I too can become a very senior leader in this organization. So I think that is the transition that, we need to make. And because you're not going to be made accountable if you drop off the workforce, it's not that you're answering anybody as to why you didn't continue your work. Somewhere you push it aside, and at a much later date, you come to regret that if only I had the tenacity to push through, I could have been a different person. That somehow naturally for men doesn't happen, again, because of this years of conditioning. So again, going back to Swati's point, I think the women have to take charge of that accountability to herself. That why am I denying myself this chance? It is me who is denying myself the chance, in many, many situations. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it definitely starts from within. Anjali, what would be your experience or comment here? Like, have you ever experienced subconscious biases, maybe in your personal life or professional life, where you didn't even realize that you also had a bias because of certain way of upbringing?
I must actually start first. I think Women's Day is a great day to celebrate all the people who have made it possible for you. So what Adwaita was saying really resonated. I was raised in a family where it was not just allowed, it was expected that you'd make something of yourself. So it was just not an option to actually not have a profession and make something of yourself. My mother was a highly educated woman, but for her generation did not work outside the home. And that's the other thing. You ask women, what do you do? Oh, I don't work. They work a lot. They just work inside the home, and it is somewhat sort of undocumented work and uncompensated work, so it doesn't get counted. So I just say my mother didn't work outside the home. So it was never optional to not work for me. I was raised with high expectations that go out and make something of yourself. I entered the workplace first in a lab at ISRO. And when you're a young engineer, it really doesn't matter what gender you are. You don't even realize. So at that point, you're yourself somewhat gender blind. Then I was further fortunate that my first real job was with McKinsey & Company in New York, in financial services strategy, where most of our clients and client teams and our teams were men, but nobody made you feel female. So you kind of checked your gender in at the door. And we had amazing role models, whether it was Jane Fraser or Sandy Boss or Joanna Barsh. And then I moved to India. And what seemed like a very normal, streamlined career course, with, of course, you would have children along the way. And I have not yet mentioned my spouse, which is huge oversight. I don't think any of us could do, at least I know I couldn't do what I do or have done and will continue to do without an extremely supportive spouse. And not just supportive, but enabling spouse. This is, by the way, the case for most men also. And men feel okay to say, listen, I owe a lot to my wife. Somehow as women, we feel that we shouldn't acknowledge the men in our lives, but we must. They are as much a part. So we are also somewhat gender biased when we say, hey, I did it on my own. No one does it on their own, men or women. Everybody needs a village, except that the village sort of comes socially ready-made for the men, and the women have to construct their own villages and their communities. So I moved to India with McKinsey, proceeded to have 2 children, phenomenally supportive firm. But then I found at some point that the biases are there in our culture. And I'm now talking 20 years ago. I did a survey with well-trained consultant, right? So 15 people I surveyed. all amazing women, including Adwaita's mom, Falguni, who's a dear friend, and Renuka at that time, and various other, many of the ICICI women. And the one refrain I heard from everybody is make your choice and be comfortable with it. I still remember I running into Shikha in a lounge at Hong Kong airport, waiting for a flight. And she said, how are you doing? And Renuka, very similar conversation. How are you doing? I said, I'm doing fine. And I'm wondering, my children, nursery, etc. She says, all children grow up. Just don't obsess so much. My mother, who I asked her, am I doing the right thing with my children, etc. She says, sabke bacche bade ho jate hain, tumhare anokhe hain. Meaning, in Hindi, she said, which means that everybody's children grow up, are yours unique? They will also grow up. So there was never a question of stopping working. Whether in my marriage family, my birth family, my work family, and we have to create that work family. So the only thing I would say to women is, really find those can-do positive people around you who are believers and not detractors. And edit out all the detractors. There are enough believers and supporters. Actively find them, actively engage them, and keep the positive reinforcement coming. Take charge of that positive echo chamber versus the negative echo chamber, which says you're a bad mother, you're a bad wife, you're a bad daughter, you're a bad daughter-in-law. Edit that out. Edit in the positive supporters. So I'm sure there have been opportunities that have not come my way because of gender. I'm not sure I have noticed those opportunities because there have been enough that have come. So just focus on the positive, grab opportunities, make the most of them, and somehow the universe also arranges itself. Again, very powerful message I got from one of my most dear mentors. And I remember there were some men on my team, older men, who were giving me a hard time. And I was like, what do I do? He says, woman, get up and do your job. As simple as that, right? Stop thinking about whether they are men, you are women, whatever. Just get out there and do your job. You're a CEO, perform.
Fantastic. And I think we are also seeing comments here. So guys, if you have any questions, please feel free to add in the comment section, and we'll definitely take it through during the conversation. So Shweta, would love to bring you in here, and we keep discussing that there are so few women at the partner level in the VC industry. Sometimes people think that there are biases, given that there is very less funding to women startups. What do you have to say about these subconscious biases, and more importantly, as a women leader now in this space, how can we bring a change?
Sure. Look, yeah, in any which way we look at it, right, the percentage of money that flows to women founders, etc., there's a lot to be done, right? So I think first we accept that is the case. Now you can question, is it because there are fewer women wanting to start up versus there is a bias, right? But I think one thing that really is true, and I think Renuka was also talking about this, right? There is this in the woman's mind as well as subconsciously in the decision maker's mind, there is this big thing around the life stages a woman has to go through, right? So when you're meeting a founder who, say, in her mid-20s, late 20s, has a partner, somewhere nobody may say it out aloud or even think it out aloud. There is this question, and in venture capital, you're always playing for those big outcomes, right? And you want that entrepreneur who's all in, who will just hit the ball out of the park, like generate this $1 billion outcome for you, right? And then the question is just there that, look, but today she wants to do this, like 2 years, 3 years later, will she be as committed? And I think that, so there is definitely that bias that maybe there is a little bit of an underestimation of the women's hunger, desire, capability to really make it happen versus men's. And it's just, again, because you're not seeing enough women role models right now. Adwaita's mom, Falguni, she's a great example, right? But once you see a few, your mindset shifts. So I think we just have to keep at it, right? And I would say in the last 4 or 5 years, just the number of women we're seeing coming and pitching, and not just in sectors where you will expect more women, like consumer, even in enterprise tech, I'm seeing CEO founders being women and raising money, not just in India, but then going on to raise follow-on rounds. So it's definitely happening. There is that bias. But again, I think what Anjali was saying, there are also enough people who are now aware and really believe that we need to change this. So it is about, finding those people and somehow, having those few people in your moment of doubt who will really pull you up, right? I can say in my personal experience that happened when I was in my late 20s. I had just moved back to India and everybody was like, well, are you married? Are you getting married? This whole idea of a single woman in private equity who's just moved back from the US, is living alone in an apartment. It was just like, okay, what next? What is she going to do next? And then, people in my family, if you make that much money, like how will you find a guy who makes more money than you? It's like really limiting your choices, right? So there are all of these things. But I think, again, it's about being clear about what you want. And then, yes, you can't do everything, but if you're clear about your few main priorities, what's important to you, it happens, right? And same for funding for women as well. It happens, it shines through. I mean, for me, I've been in investing for 15 years. And for the longest time, I could never say like I've funded a few companies with women founders, but in the last 2 years, we have 3 in our portfolio, right? So it's changing. It really is changing. So I think the tide is very strong and we all kind of need to capitalize on it and hopefully look at a very different future.
No, I think Shweta, very well said. And I would say your one thing resonated with me so well. I remember when I was moving back from US to India, booked this one-way ticket. And people were questioning. They were like, visa nahi laga kya? And I said, I do have H1B, but I'm making a conscious choice that I want to come back to my country and make a difference. And then people are like, uski shaadi ho rahi hai, she's getting married. So even for someone who has the kind of educational background that I have, it was hard for people to digest the fact that women can move continents because of professional reasons. So completely resonated with the sentiment. Adwaita, I just wanted to get your thought as well. I know you mentioned that growing up, it was a pretty like a fair world for you, but I wanted to get your perspective that, let's say at Nykaa, when you see these kind of biases, maybe coming up in team meetings or maybe when you're entering into an investor room where you see these biases, like how do you address those?
Yeah, so I'll take that in 2 parts. See, at Nykaa, there are very little biases, right? Because the business was started by women, and we have a lot of women in leadership positions. So I as I'm hearing some of these stories, I feel that it's something that I just don't associate with at all. The women in our organization are extremely outspoken. Most of our heads of divisions, heads of businesses are women. So I'd say that the gender split at Nykaa is not very typical. I've loved working with women. I've watched a lot of team members of mine and people on my teams who've gotten pregnant, had babies. I think when they come back, they are even more dedicated, even more devoted, even more time efficient, and even more successful. So I think I'm a huge fan of, young mothers. I think the kind of hustle and rigor they bring because they need to get home to their child is next level. They're just, they're a league apart. I know me and my mama are often discussing how amazed we are by our working moms. So I've been really pleased and I would like to say and hope that we don't really have any biases at Nykaa, predominantly because we have a lot of women in our leadership positions. I think I did experience a lot of it when we used to go out and raise funds, particularly in the early days. So back in 2012 to 2015, when Nykaa was not established, we must have gone and pitched to at least 50, 60 funds. And some of the biggest names, we'd be sitting in front of them, telling them about this beauty idea, and they just could not understand, right? They were just like, what is the size of this opportunity? Who buys beauty products? I have a girlfriend, she buys beauty products once a year, but your girlfriend is not the only customer out there, right? You don't make your whole assessment of the market just based on what your girlfriend's behavior is. So I think by not having women in enough leadership roles at investment companies and venture capitalist firms, you're totally missing a very large consumer base and an understanding of a very large consumer base. So I can't tell you the number of venture capitalists we met who just did not get beauty. And they just kept saying, this is a tiny business. Why would anyone buy on your platform? Why not on Amazon? They just couldn't understand how a woman can be so enthralled by discovering beauty on its own app.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of them would be regretting now. But thanks, Adwaita, for creating this path. I'm sure a lot of women founders take inspiration from the work that you've done. Changing gears, I think what we have established, glass walls exist, as Anjali mentioned, and we personally, professionally have experienced some unconscious biases. But let's move towards solution. And I also saw a few questions in the comment section where the most important question is, how can we bring more men into the conversation? Because it should not just become like a social discussion, right? I think there's also a very strong business case around bringing diversity. And I think, Adwaita, you touched upon that, bringing mothers, how they are like the perfect time managers, if we can say that. So would love to hear perspective on how can we build a stronger case, because I'm sure we have business leaders. I think if we can put a business case, people will take faster action to bring more diversity to every table that they are creating. And I think, Adwaita, would love to start with you, and also, just going back to the quote that you mentioned, which also resonated with me, because you said leadership to me is as much about ambition and rigor as it is about compassion and empathy. And I do feel that, when you have women at critical leadership positions, they bring a very differential leadership quality. They bring a lot of empathy. And just to give an example that, at Open Secret, a chief growth officer is Ritika. She's also a HBS class of 2016, a mother of 7-month-old baby. And we have been very focused on culture from day one. And I always used to think that I'm such a, I always think about culture. But since we had Ritika, we had so many conversations, and the kind of empathy, the kind of leadership, the kind of changes that she has brought to the organization, I don't think we could have achieved that, or we could have gotten that without that women point of view. And it's more about like diversity. So again, building a very strong business case so that we can start talking about actions and changes.
I think for me, it's not that women are better than men and women are higher EQ and all of that. I think that's sort of the antithesis of what we should be, the route we should be going down. I mean, my sort of challenge to anyone who's wondering if they're all would benefit from women is like, don't bet on women, bet on diversity. I think if you just put together a very diverse team, I see here so many teams, you take the most diverse team, right? Both in terms of age, gender, sexual orientation, and the kind of magic that flies out of that team is unparalleled. So I'm a big believer in just diversity, both in terms of gender and in age and so forth. I think, you just need to experience it once to be convinced of the power of it. So I'd say that's perhaps how I'd look at it.
No, absolutely. Anjali, you mentioned about, being more solution focused. People are asking, how can we bring more men as allies? What would you say to that?
Being gender blind starts with yourself, and what Adwaita says really resonates with me as well. It is now established, there is enough data actually, that research and data that shows that diverse teams lead to better problem solving outcomes. So I don't think we have to actually make a case for women to be in a team or in an organizations. And I think it is almost sort of reverse sexism to say, hey, women are more empathetic and men are less. Plenty of non-empathetic women and very empathetic men. So just get as many different perspectives and voices, whether it is gender, it is ethnicity, it is race. In our country, race is not less of an issue, but yeah, certainly religion, caste, socioeconomic background, sexual orientation, all of that makes for a richer pulao. We are a pulao country, biryani. So add all the flavors and you get something really popping. And we must get the men in, because for the most part, regardless of the 50% of the world is female, the power equation is still largely men in important, powerful positions. And I don't say this in a negative way, but that's, again, the facts. So without involving folks in influence, with influence and power, how will we solve? Everything can't be solved through just internal dialogue. So we must expand the circle, get the men in. And there are enough allies. Whether they are your classmates or workmates or family mates, there are enough allies. We must cultivate them, we must celebrate them. and make each other allies also.
Absolutely. Then, Shweta, let me ask you this question. I think both Adwaita and Anjali have mentioned that there is a clear business case. I mean, of course, you need to bring more diversity to the room. You can serve the business well. Then why there's still a gap? Do you think the education is missing, or there's something else?
Yeah, I think it's just that the enlightenment or the awareness, right? That so historically, again, right? If you look at some of these, whether it's entrepreneurship or finance, it has been led mostly by men, right? So there is years and years of that kind of a role model being established, right? And it's only today that people are realizing that, look, when I have a diverse team, I make better investment decisions, right? And the world has changed in a way, right? It wasn't before. So we've seen this in our enterprise tech companies, which are looking to go public in the US. The bankers are giving us advice that, look, you need to have a more diverse leadership team. You need to have more women in the team, because these companies sell to large enterprises in the US and they want to see more women. They don't want to see 8 Indian men in the leadership team, right? So now this, when it's coming to the founders, these are the discussions that happen in the boardroom. It's very clearly about, the bottom line, right? Commercial implications. So I think one is that actually your clients are now pushing it, because your clients are large companies where this whole, dialogue is now a lot more developed. And secondly, it is that I think as a manager, people are being pushed to be sort of real leaders, right? Not be managers, be leaders, be empathetic, understand your teams, etc. in a way that, and be inclusive, right? Which earlier was not the case. And I think the millennials and the younger generation today also demands it. They're not happy to come work in a company where the culture is not inclusive. So I think all of that is making people realize this is important. And then it's addictive, right? Once you do it and you have a high performing team, exactly what Adwaita is saying, it changes the discourse, right? Or you have one person in the team who pushes and says, really, like, is that really true? Are we being like, is this just a subjective view, or is this really an objective view? And then one person says it and the others also start resonating, right? So you just need these seeds to be planted. And thankfully, I'd say the environment right now is really, really receptive to it. So I think it's a very high degree of awareness, more than I've ever seen, even in financial services, right? For the last, I've been in it for 2 decades. People have been talking about it, but I'd say in the last 5 years, the wave is a lot stronger than it's ever been.
No, I really love it. I think once you are addicted to it, then there is no going back. I hope that stays. Renuka would love to get your perspective here as well. Do you agree that right now people have enough awareness, they are all educated, and it's only like time to take actions, or there is a little more education still needed?
No, I think definitely I completely agree with everything my co-panelists have spoken about, including Shweta's comments. I do see a lot more women entrepreneurs coming forward and so on. But, I would say that what we are, again, sorry to repeat myself, we are dealing with centuries of conditioning. Adwaita spoke about, I had to relocate to Delhi, right? I mean, it is not, I don't know how much of a conversation it was and on what basis that was decided. So in the US, for instance, I know of many of my friends whose husbands took a backseat in their career to let their wife, make a great career, and they are a happy family. And in India, I don't see that. This whole home, as Anjali spoke about as well, right? How is the decision taken as to how will both the man and the woman balance out their career aspirations and still have a family, and finally be happy with whatever are the decisions that they've taken? We need to probably work on that openness, in terms of, for what is it that you and I as a couple want to really do, rather than worry about what my father did or what my mother would have done or what my neighbor is expecting me to do. I think to that end, if we work harder, probably you will have more women who feel confident to express themselves rather than succumb themselves saying that, who's going to open my mouth and, say all of these things. After all, it's expected that if my children can't be left in a creche, or if I have no parents or in-laws supporting me, I have to. I am now again assuming that that is how it must be happening, that if there is no help, if you have to this thing, it is the mother who has to take a back seat. I think if we bring some of these conditioned responses to question, put it back on the table and you guys decide, how do you want to do it? Combined with all the facilitation now of hybrid working, much greater awareness, as Shweta said, at workplace to accommodate longer maternity leave, and all of that will definitely change, the character of the workplace and the numbers as well, going forward. So I would say that we are already there. There is a hell of a lot of work we need to do, and we have to keep the present momentum of bringing this to discussion, forcing companies, expanding the funnel for women, giving them the support at every level. And I find that in organizations where there are already women at the top or at senior management level, they become a very important magnet to hold other women. Whereas in other organizations where there are no women, it is always very difficult for somebody to become that champion and bring about a change. So can we force companies to say that, you need to have X percentage in senior women and solve for that problem and, improve the representation of women in leadership? The problem is far from solved, very, very far from solved. But I would say I'm very optimistic that it will get solved.
Absolutely. Adwaita, you wanted to
Yeah, I think just building a little bit on Renuka's point, I also think, these gender biases or gender sort of expectations that have been built over centuries, as everyone's been talking about, is also so unhealthy for the men, right? Imagine how much pressure we raise our boys with, that they have to be the breadwinners, that they have to lead their home, that they have to guide their wives. I mean, this is unhealthy in both directions, and so again, it's something that only now at this age that I'm starting to see that a lot of my guy friends are under tremendous pressure because they really think that by this age, they need to be totally sorted and take care of their whole family. Like, these gender norms, sometimes we think that it affects women, and it does very disproportionately, but it also affects, young boys and men as well.
Definitely. Completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think we have about like last 5 minutes left. And I wanted to ask this one last question. We are a bunch of privileged men and women on this panel today. And I wanted to ask you, what is that one thing that each one of us can do to make a difference? I started this panel by saying that hoping 10 years or 15 years down the line, we don't need to celebrate Women's Day because that will be the parity between the genders. And also addressing the reality. If I can just share one example, I grew up in a very small city in Rajasthan, and last year I traveled to my hometown and I went to see my old house. And what I saw completely broke my heart. There was a little girl, she was sitting outside and she was still making food and cooking. So of course, we have spoken about a lot of changes that we have seen, but there's a lot of work which still needs to be done. And I think, Anjali, I think what you said really hit home for me when you said that, we need to have an equitable sharing of workload at home as it is in the workplace. So what would be your one recommendation, like one thing that each of us can commit here to make a meaningful difference here? And it's not just talking, but there's also some action taking out from here.
I think it's not enough to fix the hardware. Policies, systems, laws, organizational processes, in some ways, all of this is the hardware. We have to work on the software. Software is a social context, social attitudes, mindsets, and enough has been said. Renuka mentioned it as well, of centuries of social conditioning for men and women. Adwaita's point around, and I see this as, men really don't have a choice either, right? Women at least have a choice. Affluent women have a choice to not work. Men don't have the choice. They're required to be providers and for the family. So if there is one thing we could do differently, I'm sure there are many things we should be doing differently, but the one thing to change the home place is we are doing a reasonable job of raising our daughters. We have to do a better job of raising our sons. We are raising our daughters to be smart, fierce, independent achievers. We're not necessarily raising our sons to celebrate those women in their lives and enable their spouse as much. So I go back to, we have to fix our home places before we get to equitable workplaces.
Absolutely. Shweta, what would be that one thing from your side?
Yeah, I think for me is, do whatever you can to sort of co-opt men into this thinking as well. And it's, for women like us who are in leadership positions, we interact with a lot of men, right, who are our peers, etc. So the idea is like, how do you co-opt them in? And I've seen the most amount of success with men who have daughters. I think for them, it's now becoming very, very clear, right? Like what life can be like for their daughters, and they're already very high degree of awareness, I'd say. So I think that's what's required, because again, it can't just be the women, right? We need to have the men become allies, and again, it is a drug, but we need to sort of we need to be the peddlers who give it to them, and then hopefully, we see the big change.
Absolutely. Bringing women to this conversation, I think that's a feedback very well taken. I think next time when we do this conversation, it will be both men and women on the panel. Adwaita, what about you? One recommendation.
Yeah, so I think, I'd take my mom's example here. So not, I think both the prior points were about raising better men, incorporating men into the conversation. I think what I love about watching my mom is she has always sort of lived life on her terms, and she's never let anyone's expectation, including husband, parents, parent-in-laws, and children, come in the way of her doing what she wants. And I think by doing exactly what you want, not holding guilt, committing to your decisions, actually you allow everyone around you to also see that, hey, it's not selfish to live your life on your terms. And, as a young child, I used to be like, Mom, why do you have to go to office? She would go. I'd get a holiday break. She's like, I want to go hiking with my friends. She'd go. My dadi's like, sit with me every morning. She's like, sorry, I can't. And you know what? By the end of it, everyone sort of accepts it, right? And by living for yourself, you actually give others a license to live for themselves as well. So not getting debilitated by expectation, living on your own terms is what I think we can do.
No, I think that's fantastic, Adwaita. And just to echo some of the comments, people mentioned about this guilt of a mother. And I think it's a perfect example that, you just need to be unapologetic you and just fight that guilt. So very well said. Renuka, the last thought and recommendation from your side.
So, at least the place I am in, right, as an investor, investing in a number of companies, we are seeing a lot of benefit in cross-pollinating experiences, getting the CXO suits to talk to each other and see how do they bring more diversity at workplace. We have also started to measure. So we've started an initiative in Multiples called the Multiples Shift. So where we are trying to measure, is there equity, is there empowerment, enablement at workplace, including diversity, and bringing this community of companies invested by Multiples and our extended partners together, in making this shift. And I'm pretty confident that this cross-pollinating of experiences will make a difference. The other thing I often think about is at our education, first of all, I totally agree with Anjali that the home places have to change. And I'm very, very sure that people who have grown up in a home where men and women shared the load, they also made sure when they got married, they had an equal place. And to Adwaita's point, they also raised children like that, right? And not felt guilty and so on and so forth. We need to fix that. Equally, I'm thinking whether we should eradicate any stereotype material in our education, right from childhood. Systematically go through all the content that we give our children, which is completely stereotyped, even in teaching history, if you want to eradicate certain things which are speaking to stereotype, so that you start to build that mindset at the educational institution, and also you come home and you see a place where man and woman are working together to make things happen for the family. I think children learn best through observation, and we are talking about bringing about changes over generations, combined with no confusion coming from the text, which is talking to certain stereotypes, will definitely, produce results. And Shweta once, in her comment, she said that she's seeing a big change, already happening. I think it will all come together.
No, Renuka, very well said. And I would say, what this reminded me? This reminded me that it's time to change the Cinderella story. I think it's time to teach your girls that you no longer have to wait for the prince to save you. You're powerful enough to save yourself. So thank you so much for what a wonderful panel. I have to say that I myself had multiple aha moments, and I hope that people who joined in would agree with me. Thank you so much for taking out the time. As I shared earlier, that we are kicking off an entrepreneurship chapter, and this was the kickoff conversation. We will be sharing a lot more details about the community, and we will have a lot more honest, candid conversations like this. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and a special thanks to our panelists for being so honest and so candid. And I really hope that we don't have to celebrate International Women's Day 10 years down the line. So thank you so much for joining, and everyone have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ahana and HBS, for bringing us all together.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.